So, before the summer, we were in the book of Daniel, and we left Daniel, not Daniel 7, we're Daniel chapter 6, beg your pardon. We're Daniel chapter 6. We left in Daniel chapter 5, and we're going to start wrapping up the book. We're going to look at Daniel chapter 7, and then we're going to look at Daniel chapter 6. I was trying to work on Daniel 7 today to get ahead, because I'm off next week, so I don't have next week's luxuries to prepare, so I'm trying to do it today for next week, or 2 weeks' time, So Daniel 6, we're going to look at Daniel 6. I'm going to attempt to go through Daniel 7. Once you get into Daniel's visions, it starts to get very messy, and I don't think I'm qualified to really touch that. Plus, I don't want to lose myself and everyone in the process. But we're going to look at Daniel 6, and we'll look at Daniel 7, because the visions, they get a bit complicated, but Daniel 7 kind of wraps up what we've been looking at so far in Daniel. So let's recap the other chapters, and I'm going to highlight a few themes recurring in the book. In the book of Daniel, there are two themes that we've kind of looked at that recur through the book. The first one is that of pride and humility. So in the book of Daniel, you see the proud king. You see Nebuchadnezzar makes a statue to worship. Do you remember in chapter 2 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They have to bow down to the statue, and they don't bow down, and they get thrown into the fiery furnace. That's pride. Here's a massive statue that represents me. I want you to bow down to it. I want you to worship me. So the king is being worshipped like a god. We'll see in chapter 6 when we read it that King Darius goes along with the rule that people should only pray to him. Pride again. Pride's all over the book. And I suppose you can be forgiven in thinking that, you can be, if you're a king, you can be proud. I mean, I'm sure Prince Charles, or King Charles, is proud of his status. If I was a king, I'd probably be proud of my status as a king. But these kings are proud to the point that they demand worship. Okay, they're making themselves like a god, and they're demanding worship. So there's pride, and then there's this type of pride. And don't forget where Daniel is. The nation of Israel took their eyes off God many times. God warned them many, many times. If you start to worship other gods, if you take your eyes off me, if you follow the other nations and worship what they're worshipping and do what they do, you're going to be judged. And God promises some exile is going to come. They worship Jerusalem. They worship Mount Zion. They love, this is our place. Isn't it great? And God says, listen, if you don't focus on me, you're going to get wiped out. And we're going to ruin your land, and you're going to be taken into exile. And that's exactly what happens. The Babylonians come in, and they just take them captive. People are scattered. The nation is destroyed, and Daniel and his friends are captured, and they're in Babylon. Okay? And these kings in Babylon have captured God's people. They're holding them hostage there. But they're going to get their comeuppance at some point. Daniel, on the other hand, though, he's raised to the high ranks in Babylon, but he's humble. This is sort of in contrast to the proud kings. In everything Daniel does, he gives glory to God. He knows his place. He's subject to God himself. He only worships God. And as we'll see from today's passage, the well-known passage, Daniel in the lion's den, he continues to worship God and pray to him even in the face of death. So we've got pride and humility as a big thing in the book of Daniel, but closely related to that, which we've touched on throughout, is the theme of beasts, if you remember. And this is something you don't know necessarily hear in the Sunday school stories or the Holiday Bible Club stories. Something that I didn't realize until I looked into this. Remember, in Daniel chapter 1, we have the test that Daniel had. There's the choice foods for all of the king's food that people are eating, and Daniel says, I'm not going to eat that, because it was sacrificed or offered up to the gods or whatever, blessed by the gods. He says, I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat vegetables. You remember that story, Daniel chapter 1? And after the length of time, I think it was 10 days, but I'm not sure. After the length of time, they actually looked better. They were doing better for eating the vegetables than the rest of the people who ate the king's choice food. But the choice food, the food that they were eating would have been meat and you think of a roast. It might have been roast pork in Babylon. Maybe they were happy to eat pigs in Babylon. But think of those sort of king's banquets with all the meat. If you think of eating meat, grabbing a juicy chicken leg, and ripping the flesh off the bone, man, my mouth's watering. But you think about that, it's very beast-like activity, devouring flesh. In Genesis, when humans were created, they were told to eat vegetables and plants. That was their diet. It was the fruit and the vegetables of the field. That was their diet. They weren't supposed to eat the animals in the Garden of Eden. And actually, the animals weren't supposed to eat the animals either. The animals had plants for their food. After the fall, what do the beasts do? They devour each other. They rip flesh off bone. They eat each other. They kill each other. So there's a contrast there. Daniel's saying, I'm not going to do that. That's that beastly activity there, in a sense. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to act like a proper human, like a human was supposed to act. And this is kind of the first hint that Babylon is like a beast in the way it's acting. And Daniel doesn't want to associate with the beasts. And this theme of beasts is a thread that runs through the Old Testament. We see, for example, Cain kills Abel. In other words, he acts like a beast. As soon as Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they act like beasts. They're in the wilderness where the beasts devour each other. Cain kills Abel. Like animals would kill each other. And Cain's descendants, he runs off and he builds a city of blood. Genesis 4, you don't have to look it up. Genesis 4, one of Cain's descendants, a guy called Lamech, says to his wives, listen to me, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. In other words, he was proud of the fact that he killed so many people. And he makes a city of blood, built on blood, violence, which represents the beasts. After the flood, do you remember Ham is cursed? Noah has 3 sons. One of them's cursed. Ham's descendants was a guy called Nimrod. And Nimrod is described as a mighty warrior. He's like a beast because he slaughters many people. What does Nimrod go and do? It says he goes and builds a city of blood based on violence. Do you know what that city's called? Babylon. So Nimrod creates Babylon. It's a city of violence. It's likened to a beast. And the Babylonians don't act like humans should. They act like beasts. They take over places. They murder people. They kill people. They're not acting like the true humanity should act. They're acting like beasts. This is all sort of under the surface there of the text. Now, also, if you remember in chapters 4 and 5, remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and his sons? Nebuchadnezzar is walking and he looks over his kingdom and he says, wow, this place is amazing. I am pretty much the best there is. And what happens? He gets cast out into the wilderness where the beasts are. And actually he becomes a beast like himself. In fact, you've got Daniel 6 open. Go to Daniel chapter 4. You'll see verse 33 of Daniel chapter 4. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people. And what did he do? He ate grass like an ox, like a beast. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. He turned into a beast. So he's proud. Look how great this place is. Look how great I am. He's brought down. He's humbled. But he becomes like a beast. And as I said last time, humans are to be the royal image of God. They're supposed to rule over the birds and the beasts. But when they forget that and they make themselves into a god, then they become less than human. They become like the beasts. That's sort of the themes going on here. And it's a reminder for people to remember their place before God. We've been given so much responsibility as God's image bearers. We have a duty to rule over the earth on God's behalf. We have a duty to take care of it, but we can't let the power and position go to our heads. So with all that in mind, let's have a look at Daniel in chapter 6, facing up to beasts. Let's read the chapter. Chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Daniel was so good at what he did. They could not find corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den, a den of beasts." Excuse me. "Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Once it's in writing, according to their law, you can't change it. Once it's there, it can't be changed. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him, because he knew he was duped into making this edict. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den, and when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And that's the end of the chapter. Rather than going through it bit by bit, I want us to look at this in the light of the context that we just set out. First of all, Daniel's humble. In the contrast to the proud king, Daniel is humble. And he's devoted. He prays to Yahweh. He is committed to praying to the Lord. Nothing will stop him doing what he is called to do as a follower of Yahweh. Even in the face of opposition, even death, he still does what he's supposed to do. That shows devotion there. Daniel is of very high status, which of course causes the rest of the people to be envious of him, especially because he's an exile from Judah. He's not even one of the Babylonians. He's a foreigner there, brought in, one of the hostages in a sense. That's going to get their goat up as well. So of course the trap is set for Daniel by getting King Darius to issue a decree that only people can pray to him. But Daniel continues to pray. And of course he's thrown into the lion's den. And as we know, Daniel is saved from the lion's den because the angel of the Lord shut their mouths. And the result is that God is revered and Daniel prospers. So what we have here is an example of the way things should be. It's an example of a taster, in a sense, of what happens to those who trust in God. See, we have Daniel standing up for the Lord. Even in the face of opposition, even in a foreign place, Daniel is standing up for what is right and what is true. And he humbles himself in the contrast to the pride that we see in Babylon. And he's honored by the Lord. And he faces the beasts. He is the epitome of what a human should be. He's like Adam in the Garden of Eden, only eating the vegetables. He's like a new Adam, what a human is supposed to be like. And he faces the beasts. And the beasts kind of submit to him. It's the way it should be. The beasts are supposed to submit to the humans. Humans are supposed to rule over the beasts. And that's, in a sense, what happens in the lion's den. They don't harm him. They should have harmed him, but they don't. It's like a flashback into Eden, where Adam would have been with the lions and all the other beasts, and they wouldn't have harmed him. And with God's help, you see, he becomes this example of what the original human should be like. Flashback to chapter 1 with the vegetables. He's like the new Adam. And this is all leading to chapter 7, which I'm not going to spoil. Even though it's complicated, it makes makes more sense in all light of this, because chapter 7, believe it or not, Daniel has a vision of 4 beasts. See the theme running through this? And the beasts stand for different kingdoms. Now, I'm not going to say any more. Come back in 2 weeks' time, you'll hear it. But this is all leading towards that. Because chapter 7, not to spoil it, but chapter 7 also gives a glimpse into the future of what's going to happen to these beasts, of a new humanity, where the beasts are subdued forever, and humans will rule again the way they're supposed to. It's a glimpse into the future. But remember this at the same time. This book was written to people in exile. People who are asking the question, what do I do in exile here? I'm not in my own land. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to worship God in all of this? What do I do when I'm facing opposition? And people reading this book would be encouraged to take that stand for the Lord, even in a foreign place, of people who don't act like humans should act. People are living like wild animals, killing each other and so on. They're encouraged to take a stand for the Lord. So God's people in exile can see some hope that he is with them in the exile. And if they humble themselves and they trust in him and obey him, he'll bring them through the exile. And someday these beasts will be crushed. And later in the story, of course, the Babylonians are destroyed. But Babylon stands as a nation that opposes God, that acts like a beast. Even the New Testament, actually in Revelation, it refers to Babylon as well. It's a symbol of those nations, those empires who are out for themselves, who'll kill anyone who gets in their way. And there are some powers today, if you think about places maybe like Russia, for example, you think of that, that's like a beast, willing to kill whoever gets in their way. And you think about the people, think about even the Christians in Russia, or maybe even in Ukraine, in that situation, they can read Daniel and say, you know what, this beast of Russia will soon be crushed. One day it will be crushed. And we need to be faithful to the Lord, stand firm. And even in the face of death, and some of them are dying as a result, but there's that hope that there's a new humanity where these beasts will be gone and we will subdue, the beasts will be subject to us, and there's be a new kingdom with a new eternal kingdom. This dominion will know no end, and of course we're talking about Jesus and the humanity that he brings. That's chapter 7. But this gives comfort to people like that. And that's pretty much a summary of chapter 6.